The next show was on poetry. It's the Uptown Poetry Group that Dylan Garcia Wall, Sindra Helm, Jen Hanel, Don Moss, and Jessica Snyder, along with yourself and Art Durkee,
And Robert
all
Newkirk.
member. Sorry,
And
and
the guy
Robert
named
Duke.
Robert
Right.
Newkirk.
Yes, and this was perhaps at least the top two of the interviews that you did.
Mm.
I think that it's a terrific show. It's got into the depths of poetry. It won't recapitulate all the points. People can listen to them for themselves. But speak a little bit about that one. Robert Newkirk, at some one point, you ask him, if I recall correctly, whether he's been traumatized a little bit of the critiques, and he does say that he does find it a tough process. Don Moss also shows that his wit is very natural to him. He can come up with little witticisms on the spot, and I would have enjoyed if he would have spoken a bit more than he did.
Yeah. Jen Hanel was a gal who came a handful of times in the last year or so that the UPG was going. She had a little bit of talent here or there. Sindra Helm was the gal I mentioned in an earlier interview that Jessica had some issues with because she was the gal who didn't want her stuff online. She was afraid people were going to plagiarize her or something. And she came, I think, 3 or 4 times to the UPG. But when I asked people who had come, she was willing to do it, which was interesting because she wasn't willing to really go to the UPG regularly and actually help other people. But when it came to possibly promoting herself, she was very available. To a lesser degree, Dylan was the same way. He came maybe 7 or 8 times to the UPG, and we had 200 meetings exactly. But he was on the spot to promote himself. But yeah, it's again a good show about poetry or whatnot. I think I came up with the idea because I was having trouble getting someone who is like a name or whatnot. So that's how that evolved, and like you said, it's a good show. It had its moments and whatnot.
It had some good points, particularly by you and Art Durkee, regarding the technical side of poetry too, that I think young writers would be advised to listen to. Dylan Garcia Wall, were there poem segments interspersed like the previous ones? I don't recall. I think some of your poems
Yeah, it
were one,
was.
but it would have been interesting to hear some of Dylan's poems. They are some of the best that you have in the first Magnifique.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing I do remember is Don Moss and Art Durkee. They never disliked each other, but they were the sort of polar opposites at the UPG. And I remember, I think when Art said some things, I remember Don rolling his eyes a few times. I don't remember what they were about. Don, in the years since, has gotten more right wing. He became a religious person, Christian whatnot. He moved to Georgia. He was originally from Virginia, moved to Georgia. He's written one of the great long poems of the last 100 years, uh, um, Dominions. And Art uh, sort of flaked out and went the other way. I think I've said he's had a number of problems. He had some physical problems. He lost a job and then has floundered around ever since. His parents died. He had some psycho-emotional problems here and there, and I've lost touch with him. I mean, occasionally I still hear from him, but I remember Don and Art were always sort of at loggerheads at the UPG when they were there at the same time, um, and so that's basically my memory of that show.
with the UPG, just as a final aside, what do you think? And I already know, but you can elaborate on it. What do you think puts it apart from other writing groups? And also, do you think that there is an inherent value in showcasing your poems to other people? Because I think that while there is value to it, you do have to get outside of the hand holding and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, there is value. I mean, you have to get outside of yourself. Most people don't get outside of themselves. Most people are solipsistic, and that's just the way it is. Most people are about themselves. When I was talking about your poem earlier about getting using the second person rather than the third, or getting rid of some of the second person references, that's one of those things. And I'm not saying your poem is solipsistic, but a lot of people about I, the constant first person, I, this confessional shit. So you need to get outside of it. And the basic difference between the Uptown Poetry Group and me was me. in that I set the ground rules. I said, we're not going to do politically correct bullshit. Someone can say that they dislike your poem or they think it's bad poem, and I would always try to emphasize, tell why you think it's bad, not that you dislike it. This is something that obviously I'm always harping on because I'm seen to be one of the few people in the world that it's default for me to talk about good and bad rather than like and dislike. Um, and so I wouldn't let people get away with that kind of thing. I try not to let people get away with bullshit. Um, and and so by doing that, you have a smaller group of people. A lot of people came just once and were like, "Oh, they were mean or whatnot." Well, then you're not really a serious artist if that's what you think. Um, uh, and so that's basically the difference, and that's why the UPG was successful. 200 times consecutively, twice a month for whatever it was, 8 full years plus 4 months or 3 months, whatever it was. No other poetry group that I ever knew of in New York ever did the same. You would have these groups with like old ladies who'd get together for 20 years or something, but they weren't really criticizing. I'd gone to groups like that, but a real critique group, no. It was a unique thing, and the very fact that you had people like me, like Jess, like Don Moss, like Bruce Ario, like Art Durkee, like Dylan Wall on occasion, and a number of other people. Robert Newkirk had some talent too. Uh, I know, having gone to dozens of groups over the years before then and here or there after, uh, there was never a collection of poems submitted that was better. And in fact, I think I mentioned this earlier. One of the things Art later grew to resent was the fact that he was at his best as a poet when he came to the UPG. And years later, he had a falling out with Jessica and then later with me because he thought my stating that was somehow demeaning to him. No, it's not demeaning. That's the reality. That's the purpose of the group. That's an endorsement of what the group was and how effectively it worked. Is that beforehand, Art Durkee wasn't as good a poet. In the 5 or 6 years that he came to the UPG, he wrote the best poems. And I've seen the poems, and you've probably looked online, I think you said,
Yes.
at his stuff. The stuff that there does not compare to the 4 or 5 poems that I've got on UPG. And the other 2 or 3 dozen poems of his that were of the highest quality that I had seen at the UPG.
I
So,
think Art Durkee has talent, or even great talent in some ways, but he clearly doesn't understand about objectivity because he'll go and defend subjectivity, even though objectivity works so well for him in the UPG. And you
yeah.
can see some very memorable and great poems that he wrote, and then he just decides to throw that away for this whole subjective argument just so that he can justify his likes and his biases and some of the shit that he wrote later on.
Subjectivity can help you feel good, and people like to feel good above all else, especially when other things go wrong in their life.
But I agree with you when you say that you have to get outside of yourself, because once you do that, you kind of rise up and you can see yourself the same size as everyone else, and you're just a bunch of little ants, and you can start picking apart things much more easily once that happens, and it has to become natural to you. Like you said, you have default good and bad and not like and dislike. Like and dislike is the things of kids, and good and bad is the stuff for adults.